Today we're going to talk about a few different things. We're going to talk about shifting trends in the industry, especially around the realities of the modern workforce. We're going to talk about some driver feedback data that our company WorkHound has gathered and what some of our takeaways are. And then we're going to talk about some of the ways that we can change so that we do stay successful companies out there. Now, as we get started, I know you guys are looking at me and thinking, this guy looks like he knows his trucking. Am I right? A little bit? Well, 7 years ago, that would have been the case. Now, my background was sociology. I worked in tech companies, but I love solving people problems. And so when I was digging into why driver turnover is so high, I wanted to learn the best way I can, which is go on the road. And so I did a ride along with a driver named Charles from Iowa to Los Angeles. I slept in the truck, ate in the truck, showered at truck stops, and got to see the beauty and the ugly of the road. Now, we got to see the Arizona canyons, the Nevada desert, and the Rocky Mountains all in the same day. Now, Charles was on paper logs, but this isn't a safety conference, so we're not going to worry about that. But I also got to see the ugly of the road, where drivers are treated like second-class citizens, and shippers make them wait. There's poor communication between a driver and a driver manager, and that creates frustration. But also, there's this thing called detention time. Y'all heard about this? Anyway, we experienced 7 hours of detention time, so we started to see the ugly of the road. But what got me to fall in love with the industry are the stories. And as you can see here with Charles, I think it's that bottom right picture. That's me and Charles in the back of the Peterbilt. Now, what I didn't share is that when Charles is not driving, he's a DJ at nightclubs in Des Moines. He is the turntable trucker. So in your spare time, if you're looking for content, look him up. He's doing regular live streams of DJing on Twitch. He'd love to have you as a follower. And so we get to Los Angeles, and Charles backs the truck up against the dock, and the waiting begins, and he starts pulling out turntables from underneath the bed of the truck, and then plugs up to the speaker system and starts jamming out. Now again, we're stuck there for 7 hours, so you start to find things to do. And so at a certain point, I asked Charles, I was like, hey, do you have a microphone? You know, he gave me a weird look, and I was like, I want to rap. And I know. And so what you don't know is that before I started this journey at WorkHound, I did a bunch of hip-hop stuff. Do I have any hip-hop heads out here? All right, we got a handful. So I've shared the stage with folks like Jizza from Wu-Tang and Too Short, folks like that. So if you ever want to see some of that stuff, let me know. I'm not here to talk about that too much. But there's a video of me and Charles jamming out in the back of the Peterbilt. He's DJing, I'm freestyle rapping, and we just had a grand old time. And so to this day, I still keep in touch with Charles. We're still good friends, and I learned a lot from him. And it was that sort of thing that led me to launching WorkHound. It was that trucking is a people business, and I really love the connections that come from it. And so I want to do everything I can to play a part in it. So when we think about the industry and really the workplace out there, we are undergoing the fastest evolution of how work happens. Think about COVID, how all of a sudden our decision-making changed, where we went from you have to be in person to, okay, well, maybe you can work remote. And there was video interviewing. We made a lot quicker decisions about technology. We really changed the way that we thought about how work happens. And what wound up happening as a result of that is that the workforce has evolved as well. We're no longer in a local competition for talent. And this is something that's true, especially for folks that are in your office. This is a global labor competition. If you're somebody in Kansas City, in the past, you could only get a job in Kansas City unless you wanted to commute. But now, you can get a job working for somebody in New York. You can get a job working for somebody in London. It's drastically changed. And so now our companies are not competing just with the local market. We're competing globally. You even think about some of the trucking companies that are out there. You're starting to see folks that work for US trucking companies that are based out of South America doing back office jobs. So this thing's starting to happen. And historically, what companies would say is if somebody left, like, we'll backfill. Like, who's heard the term backfill before? But that's head trash. Because if we're backfilling, what that means is that we're losing all that institutional knowledge. We're losing somebody that understands our culture and we're going to pay more money for the same skill of person. And so this head trash that is like, oh, they're gone, now we can get somebody else, is not really a reality. And it's the same thing with drivers. When we start to think about the fact that drivers are leaving, we're like, okay, we'll get the next one. But there's a shortage out there. It's tough to get someone. And if we're trying to fill the leaky bucket, it's a really tall order. So our competition out there is not each other. It is so many other things, because drivers are not just looking at professional driving as a job, they're looking at the gig economy. They're looking at Lyft and Uber, or delivering food, or working at Amazon, or construction, or even working remotely. There's so many different options out there right now. And so when we think about the jobs that we're offering, the presentation that we're making as far as, is this a destination for you, we're competing against all these folks right here. And so it's a big thing to keep in mind as we put together our narrative, because I'm sure many of us, we took Ubers or Lyfts to get here, and I'm sure we've seen it before, where you ask the driver, hey, do you have your CDL Class A? They'll say, yeah, I do. So there's a lot of people out there that have chosen a different path, and it's on us to figure out, how do we make this job more compelling for them? Now, some companies out there didn't make it. How many of you are familiar with Blockbuster, Toys R Us, and Kodak? Familiar, right? So Blockbuster, they had the opportunity to buy Netflix. And I'm sure many of you remember going to Blockbuster, paying your late fees, or paying your fee for not rewinding, paying overpriced microwave popcorn. But Blockbuster had the opportunity to buy Netflix, I think for like $50 million. But Blockbuster said, people don't want to have their DVDs shipped to home, and the streaming technology, the internet's too slow. And Netflix kept doing their thing. They didn't buy Blockbuster didn't buy them, and Blockbuster got beat. I think now it's just a relic. And with Toys R Us, they had the opportunity to win the e-commerce game. That was the destination to buy toys or buy your kids' toys. But again, Amazon kept creeping up in the market, and Toys R Us said, no, people want to come in person for this experience. And again, now Toys R Us is a relic. And with Kodak, they had the technology for the digital camera. But they said people really want to focus on quality. And I think if any of us pull out our phones right now, we'd see that quality is not the key focus for pictures. So there's 4 words that really were the detriment of each of these companies. That will never work. It was those 4 words that were the difference between them still being around and them being memories. And in the future, people won't even know who these companies are. And there's companies out there that we frequent today that are headed on that same path. Think about the restaurants or shops that you go to that put signs up like this, that say, we're closed today because there's a staff shortage, or people just don't want to work anymore. But that's nonsense. People want to work. It's just people want to work at good jobs. And so our goal out here is to figure out, how do we create a good job that people want to come and work with? And if we're telling ourselves people don't want to work, we're already accepting defeat and already saying that will never work. So we have to keep that in mind as we're building our businesses and putting together our game plan for the future ahead. I really like this quote here from Charles Darwin. He says, "It's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one that's most responsive to change." So the only constant out here is change. And if you think about markets as an example, people talk about, we own this market, or we're the leader in this space. I'm sure you've heard that about people in the trucking industry. But the reality is that we don't own space in markets, we rent it, and the rent is due every day. So when we think about the modern workforce, there's really 3 things that people need to do their best work and want to stay at a company. It's money, it's team, and learning. And I want to go into each of these, because if you have each of these things inside your company, it's really hard to get somebody to leave. No recruiter can pluck somebody if their money needs are met, their team needs are met, and their learning needs are met. So the first one is money. We have to pay people enough to where money is off the table. And so it's all of us want more money, that's for sure. But one of the key things we have to keep in mind is that people want to see that their company is fighting for pay. There's all the studies out there that say that people that hop jobs wind up making more money. And so if we want to be a company that competes in this modern workforce, we have to fight for people's pay. Like, for example, If you didn't get a 10% pay raise in the past year, you wound up taking a pay cut. That's the reality of the market right now. Another challenge that we see companies do when it comes to money is they make the pay really convoluted. And we'll talk more about what the driver data says about pay, but what we see is that pay is really complicated, especially in trucking. Another thing that we often see is that companies will encourage bonuses, like sign-on bonuses, and sometimes it is a necessary evil to get somebody in the door, but it's sugar water. It only lasts till they get in the door, and the goodwill from there is gone. And in the past, people would say, oh, well, we do annual compensation reviews. Well, that doesn't work anymore because the markets move so quick. And if you're waiting for that annual mark, you're going to get left behind. So it's really important to make sure that you're adjusting to the market realities as they're happening. And then finally on here, we talk about equipment. A truck is a driver's tool to do their job and their home. And so they want to know that they're getting the right equipment so that they can make the money that they're out there to get. So we talked about money. We want to make sure that we're making enough money where money's off the table for us. And then the second thing is the team. We have to like the team that we work with, and we have to like the boss that we report to if we have one. And so if we don't have that, we got a problem. And a lot of that starts with making sure that you're doing check-ins with your team, and this is inside the office or with your drivers. You have to make sure that we're checking in with our team to make sure we are meeting their needs. You know, a lot of times right now, people's desires to learn and grow are evolving way faster than that annual mark that we've had historically. And in trucking, we have a really bad habit of trying to fix what's broken instead of celebrating what's working well. And there's a lot of positive things that happen in each of our businesses. So using positive feedback from your people can go a really long way to helping them celebrate and realize, hey, we're doing some good things here. And then the final thing that's really helpful on the team side is just making sure you're creating a culture of curiosity, where instead of saying that will never work, we say, how might we do something differently? So with team, we have to make sure that we like the people we work with and the boss that we're working with. And then the third thing is learning. We have to feel like we're learning, growing, and being challenged. Now I'm curious, show of hands, how many of you have left a job because you felt bored? Yeah, spot on. That's the reality of the modern workforce. That if we feel like we're doing monotonous stuff, repetitive stuff, if there's not an opportunity for us to grow, then we're going to leave. That's just the reality. And so at this point, the burden is on the company to map out those career paths for people, where it's training opportunities, new ways to take on, new challenges inside the business, and that's for office staff as well as for drivers. And we'll talk about some ideas for drivers specifically here later. And then the other concept that I want to share is that even though I'm talking about retention, permanent employment is dead. It's a reality. And I have a question for you. How many of you, especially for driver recruiters, if I told you I have a driver that's willing to work with you for a year, would you take that? Okay, see some hands. And so if that's the case, then you have to question, why are we saying we hire to retire, if that's not the reality that we're operating around? And so if that's the case, I really like the concept of the tour of duty. So kind of like the military, but instead of saying, you know, hey, come on here, we want you to stay forever, and we know that they're not, let's map out a plan where we say, you know, stick with us for a year, 2 years, whatever it may be. What does your success look like for you? Maybe they do want to be a driver for 10, 20 years. Maybe they just want to be a driver for a year, but let's map out a path for them either as a driver or beyond. So we talked about these three things. Make sure that we're getting paid enough money where money's off the table. Make sure we like the team that we work with. Make sure we're learning and growing and being challenged. If we do that, it's really hard to get somebody to leave. Now the challenge is that there's a lot of work that goes into making that happen. And we're all fighting to figure out, how do we fill this leaky bucket right here? And that's a really great place to start. So I want to transition a little bit here to talk about some driver feedback data that we get at WorkHound, and what the trends are telling us, and then also what we can do about it. So at WorkHound, we are a real-time feedback platform. Our goal is to capture anonymous feedback. Unfortunately, there is a fear of retaliation, so that anonymity is valuable, and allow drivers to share what's on their mind anywhere, anytime, in 90 seconds or less. We only ask for open-ended feedback, for one, because surveys create bias, but two, if our turnover rate is 95% or higher, as the national average is, we have blind spots. And so surveys are typically saying, management saying, we think we know what the issues are, but if our turnover is high, we don't necessarily know everything. So we're only asking open-ended feedback. And then what we'll wind up doing with that feedback is we segment it into one of a dozen different themes. So we're able to see what are people saying about pay or equipment or communications, whatever it may be. And so as we see here, the top theme is equipment. And of course, like I mentioned, the truck is a driver's tool to do their job and their home. So when it comes to that, creature comforts are really important. And anytime there's a frustration around a truck breaking down, that leads to some negative comments and could be a red flag of somebody leaving. Now, the past year was especially challenging, where equipment rose to number one, because it's tough to get new equipment. So that means we have to work our tail off to take care of the existing equipment we have, but the labor force isn't making it easier because there's a challenge when it comes to recruiting and retaining technicians too, but that's a different story. So the second theme that's top is people. And of course it's obvious because people, trucking is still a people business. So a lot of the people comments we get are about frustrations with particular individuals or a lack of communication from those folks. But also, as we'll talk about here in a second, there's a lot of positive comments when it comes to people. So while drivers will call out a driver manager that's frustrating them, they're also quick to praise someone that went above and beyond. And then the next theme that we've got there is logistics. And so with the logistics theme, this is capturing what are drivers saying about the movement of freight from point A to point B and all the challenges that are in there. And last 2 years, there was a lot of volatility. And so drivers felt that. The entire burden of the supply chain has been on their shoulders, and there's not a lot that they can control there. And that creates a lot of frustration. And so in the feedback we saw, what drivers were really craving was more stability and consistency, which is a tough thing to ask for in an uncertain industry like this. And so we can't control the chaos that happens out there on the road, but we can control how we communicate. And that's one of the biggest takeaways we saw from companies is that instead of saying nothing because we didn't have a great update, at least companies were committing to saying, here's the latest we know, we'll keep you posted when we know more. And I'll jump into some of these other themes here shortly. Now, we segment all the feedback based on size of company. So small is companies that have 0 to 200, medium is 200 to 500, large is 500 plus. And so what's really interesting here as we look at this is that equipment is the top theme for medium and large companies, but praise is the highest for small. And so as we dig a little deeper, those small companies have a significantly higher amount of praise percentage and positivity versus some of these large companies. And a lot of companies out here, as they're growing, are trying to figure out how do we replicate that small company experience where people are treated like a name and not just a number. And this is looking at the satisfaction scores over the course of the entire year, where as you can see, small companies stay steady throughout the entire year. But what's interesting is that medium companies start to dip down towards the end of the year. And I think one of the things to read into that is that a lot of companies are starting to roll out training programs. And we're bringing in drivers to the industry that may not be a fit. We're trying out training programs and figuring out what's the best way to work for our company. And so there's some trial and error there. Now, when it comes to the retention side of things, a lot of times we're focused on how do we address these issues that can be the critical comments, the straw that can break the camel's back. And about 17% of the comments that we saw were these sorts of things. And what's really interesting is that whenever somebody's sharing a really negative piece of feedback, it's almost twice as long as your average comment that somebody shares. Now, when it comes to a positive piece of feedback, usually it's way shorter. And so it's funny how there's this comparison between short and sweet when somebody's happy, and if somebody's upset, they're going to tell you in great detail. And when we look at all the critical comments out there, pay was the number one issue. And so when it comes to the pay frustrations, drivers are saying, I don't understand my pay, and I don't feel like it's correct. So pay is really a communication issue, more so than an amount issue. And if we think about pay in the trucking industry, especially in North America, it is the most complicated pay structure out there. Is there any other one out there? Don't worry, I'll wait. So pay is the top issue out there, and it's really frustrating for drivers. And so what we're seeing companies do to start to address this is figure out how do we simplify our pay and how do we make it predictable, and easy to understand. If we start to do those things, then that goes a long way. And we're seeing more companies out there start to focus on how do we create guaranteed pay opportunities, just so there's a little bit more stability for our people. And on the positive side of things, again, in trucking we have this bad habit of fixing what's broken. So when it comes to the praise side of things, the people theme is the one that really stands out. And so again, when drivers are sharing feedback, yes, there's some negative comments that are out there, but they're also quick to praise people when things go well. And so these praise comments are so critical because they're really great assets for you when it comes to testimonials, for sharing on Facebook, or even potentially getting more referrals. So there's a win-win that can come out of these. Now, one of the things that was really interesting in our data was that when people shared about training, about 50% of people that shared about those comments were no longer at their company by the end of the year. And so it's fascinating because training can make or break somebody joining the company. We know that the first 90 days are a high-risk time for people, but people are figuring out, is this company for me? If they're new drivers coming from a school, is this industry for me? But one of the things we have to keep in mind around training is also for the existing drivers that are out there. Because if you think about some of these guys that have maybe been with your company 5, 10 years, again, we're changing quickly. We're introducing all this new technology, new tablets, new software, all that sort of thing. That can be overwhelming. And so if we're not training them properly on that, it's easy for them to say, well, I'm going to go to a place that just has the old school approach that's simple and easy for me to understand because I don't get all this tech stuff. And so the training commitment has to be not only in the early side, but the ongoing side as well. And so ultimately, if I'm summarizing some of this data and some of the trends in the workforce right now, it's that people in the industry, people really anywhere, they want investment in their growth. And so I'm starting to see some companies that are creating growth opportunities for folks in the trucking industry. And so I wanted to share a couple of examples. So a company like PS Logistics, they've rolled out a program for road recruiters. Those guys that are really great at bringing in referrals, they actually take on a little bit of a hybrid role where they're still rolling down the road, but they're also recruiting for the company as well. And so it's creating paths where beyond driving, there's an opportunity for them. Of course, while somebody is a driver, they can also become a mentor, so they start to develop some of those coaching skills. You can also become a trainer, where that's actually going from just coaching to teaching and really helping other people level up in the industry. And then you have a company like Melton Truck Lines that they create an ambassador program where they really embrace the drivers that have been with their company for a while and figure out how do we celebrate these people so prospects out there can see that we have some good people in our company and they can have the same sort of experience. So I always find it fascinating to see that there are ways to highlight that you can be a driver and then more inside our company, so people see that path. And so it's our job. If people are wanting investment in their growth, it's our job to show that investment in their growth. Now, one of the challenges that we see out there is that there's a lot of head trash. And so one of the things that I often hear that holds companies back is this talk track of, well, this is the job our customers pay us to do. Well, the reality is that drivers are going to leave if customers continue to take bad care of them. And so there's a company like ACT who's based here in Kansas City, and what they do is they actually take feedback from their drivers and they take it to the meetings with their customers. And they say, hey, here's what our drivers are saying about working with you, and this isn't working for us. We need to make sure we hold on to our people, and right now we're running into some challenges with your facilities. So one of a few things needs to happen. Either you need to treat our people better, we need to change the rate that we're getting paid, or we're going to have to part ways because we can't lose people out here in this really competitive market. Now, the next piece of head trash that's out there that I see is that being a truck driver is a hard job. Just suck it up. Well, when people hear that, they say, fine, I'll just go be a Lyft driver. Done. I'll go find the easier job. And that's the reality now, is that if we don't change the way that we operate, people are going to go find what they want. So we have to continue to be more accommodating. And then the next piece of head trash is that doing the dirty work is a rite of passage. Well, a lot of drivers don't want to do that. And so it's either on us to evolve the job or we'll have that leaky bucket. And so one of the things that I saw USA Truck do that I thought was really interesting is they took the feedback data of what their drivers want, and they have regular conversations with recruiting, sales, and operations to say, this is what our prospective drivers want. Go find freight that mirrors closer to what they want, and then let's go fill those sorts of roles. And so they're evolving their freight lanes based on what people want instead of just sales figuring out whatever they can go grab. So there's a bunch of different ways that we can counter this head trash that's out there. Now I want to spend a little bit of time talking about where we see companies struggle out there, that really struggle to have that culture of curiosity and figure out how to become a better version of themselves. So the first one are leaders that bury their head in the sand. Anybody worked with somebody like this before? Issue comes up and they just go hide? I see you're a little shy to raise your hand because your boss may be here. That's okay. But we all know it's the case. There are people out there like that. They bury their head in the sand, they don't face issues head on, and then they think that the issues are going to go away. They won't. They just continue to surround us. The next question that we have to ask ourselves, and this is for an individual as well as for just our company, do we take feedback as a gift or do we take it as an insult? Because if we take it as an insult, we are never going to get better. But if we do take feedback, as hard as it may be, as an opportunity for us to improve, that's a huge win. Because in this industry, perception is reality. And so if somebody is sharing their perception out there, it's our opportunity to figure out how do we make changes so that we can become a better version of ourselves. Now, the other challenge that we see inside companies is a lack of accountability, where leaders will pass the baton and say, hey, retention's everyone's job. But when it's everyone's job, no one is accountable. And we know that what gets measured gets managed, and if nobody is responsible for it, nobody's going to do anything about it. So it's really important that we make sure that we find somebody that has specific responsibility over these sorts of initiatives. And we talked about this earlier, about the big companies that refuse to innovate, and they would just say, this is the way things are. I'm sure we've seen companies that are that sort of way. Arms crossed, like, we're not going to change anything. We've done it this way for 20 years. Instead of asking the question, why are things this way? Again, it's embracing this culture of curiosity to figure out how can we get better because we have to. Another thing we see people do is they justify, explain, and defend whenever issues arise. And it's a good call out for me too, because if I find myself doing it, I need to take a hard look in the mirror and just say, hey, I screwed up here. I can be a lot better. Thank you for the call out. But if we refuse to accept when there's an issue, we won't get better. Now, flipping that, I do want to talk a little bit about where I do see companies thrive. And really, it's pretty simple. It's that we have to step outside of our comfort zone. And the only constant out there is change. Change is uncomfortable. It's hard. It's messy. It takes time. But that's the thing that can really be the impact on us being successful out there. So at this point, I just want to say thank you all so much, and let's dig into some questions. Okay, so how do I get the leaders in my company to prioritize retention? Anytime you're bringing in something to bring on a solution or solve a problem, you have to hit people with the left brain and the right brain. You have to hit them with the analytical, and you have to hit them with the emotional. So on the analytical side, you have to map out what is the ROI on something like this and be able to tell a numbers-driven story. And then on the right brain side, you have to share the example of how one person was out the door, and there's ways to address those issues. And so then we save this person, and now this person is this far along in their career with the company because we took action. So it's a combination of data and then a story to back it up. That's I think, the initial way there. What's a mistake you see companies repeatedly make when it comes to controlling their retention? Gosh, I'd say one of the things is not having a leader committed to retention initiatives. There are a lot of companies out there that will hire a driver liaison or retention specialist but then they won't wind up having that person directly connected to leadership or have a regular conversation about, hey, here's what I'm hearing out there. What adjustments can we make? And so then it just winds up being somebody fielding phone calls in a windowless room, hearing drivers vent their frustrations, but then not figuring out how do we get better from all those sorts of issues. So it's making sure that if we're taking feedback or issues, that we have a process to figure out, okay, what are we going to do about this and how are we going to tell people what we did about it? So that's my thought there. How do I justify the decrease in lead generation if I pull back budget to allocate an increased amount of budget towards retention? I think we have to figure out what metrics really matter in our business. A lot of us will calculate the cost per hire, but if we're not careful, that can be a vanity metric. I think one of the metrics that I'm seeing more companies look at is the cost per net ad. So instead of saying how many people did we hire and how much did it cost to bring them in, well, that's not telling us if we brought in good people or not. But if we check the cost per net ad, it'll tell us, okay, how much are we spending to grow our fleet count over the course of a year? And then that tells a much more powerful story about, are we moving the needle inside our business? So that's one of the metrics that's out there. And then the other is that if we're not having to spend as much on lead gen, we're able to spend more on taking care of our people. And we know that retained drivers are safer, better part of our culture, and it's a win-win situation. What do you think is the best channel of contact communication for gathering feedback from drivers? Well, I'm a little biased, but first off, I'll be honest, like one of the most powerful ways to communicate with folks is face-to-face and connecting human to human. Now that being said, one of the realities out there is that there is a silent majority in this workforce. And so it's important to figure out how do we capture their perspective out there. A lot of companies will say, well, we have an open door policy, but if we're telling people go drive 1,000 miles away from the office, it's hard to walk through that open door. And so, I'm always a big believer in figuring out how do we fill that gap between somebody wanting to share what's on their mind and us saying that we have an open door policy. How frequently should we be taking a pulse on driver satisfaction? Gosh, everybody has different opinions on this. For us at WorkHound, we found that weekly is a really good cadence. Just a nudge to say, hey, tell us what's on your mind. Some people may want to share, some people may not. That's totally okay, but at least they know the company's committed to listening to them. We've experimented with daily. That was way too much. We've experimented with less frequently, and those companies get a lower percentage of feedback responses.